Hello and welcome to Season 14, Episode 17 of the Ubuntu podcast. It's Tuesday the 29th of June 2021, England 2, Germany 0, and I would like to welcome my two friends to the show. Martin, hello Martin, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. And Mark, how are you doing?
I'm very well. 3 guesses what you've been doing this afternoon.
I've been busy at work.
Of course.
I felt it was okay during a work meeting to have the England-Germany match on a tablet next to me when the CEO of the company during our stand-up said, yeah, I've got it on my screen over here. So I thought if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. Mark, what have you been up to recently?
I have been off on my holidays.
Oh, where'd you go?
Sunny and rainy and windy Weymouth.
Oh, nice. Where's that?
On the south coast of England. It's in Dorset, so it's sort of towards the southwest, but not all the way to Cornwall.
Did you do lots of going out for walks and day trips and stuff like that?
Yes, we went to Monkey World.
Monkey World!
Yes. And we went to, various other things to keep a small person entertained.
Was a small person entertained by the monkeys at Monkey World?
Yes, she was. But yeah, when your child is that age, it's not so much a holiday as parenting elsewhere, but we still managed to have fun.
I have a vague recollection of a holiday down on the south coast, and someone had a sticker on the back of their car for Monkey World, and it was something amusing. It was a play on words, and I can't remember for the life of me what it was. And the only one I can think of is not Monkey World, but the local clutch repair company called Mr. Clutch, who have stickers on the back of that you can put on the back of your car that says, I've slipped into Mr. Clutch, which makes me chuckle whenever I see them. But I can't remember what the monkey one was. If anyone knows what the monkey one is, do let us know.
The classic thing with Monkey World is that on the road there's a sign which points one way to Monkey World and the other way to Tank Museum.
Like the old nuclear power station and spiders.
Yeah.
Yes, excellent. What about you, Martin? What have you been up to?
I've been learning Godot.
Oh, you're turning into a game dev?
Well, not exactly.
Have you made a game?
I've started writing a game, yes. So off the back of us doing FOSS Talk Live, and 3 of you doing games as a...
you felt left out, did you?
It wasn't so much that. So years ago, Mark and I did a 20-line challenge, and I did Snake for that. And then we did that ridiculous Bash challenge, and we all were writing games. And writing games in Bash was interesting, but, a bit tedious. And ever since then, I've wanted to have a go at, writing an actual game. And motivated off the back of your 3 games from FOSS Talk Live, I thought, you know what, now's the time. So I've been learning Godot, and it's pretty amazing. Very impressive.
Have you been following tutorials and official documentation, or going off-piste, or just teaching yourself? How you been doing that?
So I read the official documentation, which has tutorials through the sort of introductory material and then a load of examples. That was really good. And then I watched a bunch of videos by GD Quest. And then there's a YouTube channel, Kids Can Code, and that stuff is great. And that sort of got me orientated with the basics. And then I just started doing things. And then as I've thought, well, how do I just type into your favorite search engine, how do I do this thing in Godot? And I've been able to turn up, the right answer every time. So I'm sort of muddling through now.
That's my classic strategy whenever I'm picking up a new programming language. Just what's that thing I know how to do in another language? Do this thing in new language.
Yeah, the language is really straightforward. I mean, the language I was comfortable with within minutes because it's very much like Python with a sort of a smattering of Pascal, and Pascal and Python are my 2 most favorite programming languages. So I was right at home with that. But the way that Godot works with its whole node tree system is very alien. And it was that I was reading about to understand and get my head around. And once you've got that in your mind, it's just a case of learning all the things it can do, and it can do an awful lot. So I'm far from learning all of that, but it's fun.
Excellent. Look forward to some games being published in, name your favourite store. Look forward to those in the future. Right, let's get on with the show. And first up, we have the community news. And on the list, we have some news from Canonical. Martin.
Yes, so Canonical have announced that they are going to be offering support for Blender. So a Blender LTS strategy where Blender customers will be able to get support from Canonical for Blender on all platforms.
It's funny, I've seen people doing a WTF in the community about this because it seems, rather weird. But Canonical has a support structure. They've got customers. They've got people sat there waiting for calls from customers and taking support tickets. So why not leverage that team for other things? And I don't know that we can say much about that conversation that happened between Blender and Canonical, but clearly there was a conversation at some point over the last year, and this is the fruit of that labor. I think it's pretty interesting that Canonical can turn their hand to not just Linux distro, but the applications that are providing support for the applications that are running on top. I think that's quite neat.
Canonical are providing desktop support for Ubuntu to, a number of different customers who are using Ubuntu on the desktop because there are enterprises that do that and they want support. And as you say, this is building on that support infrastructure that Canonical have in order to do the same for Blender's customers. I think it's very interesting. I wonder if we'll see any more support deals like this in the future.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's Blender is like one of the big sort of poster child open source applications, and it'll be it's important for an application like that to be able to offer support to its customers in order to be commercially successful. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Canonical starts offering support for other software like this, which other big and commercially important open source apps they are.
That's the crux of it. I mean, some people might be thinking, enterprise support for, Blender. I'm just someone at home. But there are obviously, movie studios using Blender at scale now. And that's who this is sort of geared towards, those professional users who are probably not just using Blender on a workstation, but have like a Blender render farm, probably running on Ubuntu somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I hope it continues because this is a different revenue stream for Canonical to provide support. These are people who are paying money to have engineers support them on their platform of choice. I'm not sure it actually makes it clear whether they have to be running Blender on Ubuntu or whether they support Blender on other platforms as well.
I think it said in the announcement that it's cross-platform. So if you're running on Mac OS and Windows, they support it there as well.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the Canonical support team support other operating systems than Ubuntu on the desktop as well, because there are other products that, Ubuntu supports that run on Windows and stuff.
Gotcha.
WSL for one.
Yeah. How fascinating. Well, I hope this continues, and I hope there are more of these commercial opportunities for Canonical to continue to make money and continue to exist, to develop the platform that we use on a daily basis and make a podcast about. Next up, Robert Collins shared an email from Mark Shuttleworth. Well, this is quite an old email, and it's a little story. I thought it would be interesting to put in there. This was published a week or so ago. And for those who don't know, Robert Collins was one of the earliest employees of Canonical. He's since moved on to other adventures, but he was instrumental in the development of the bizarre revision control system and Launchpad that went along with it, and a lot of the infrastructure that's been there since right at the beginning, when Ubuntu first started, or when Canonical first started, or when No Name Yet first started, before it was even known as Canonical. So I think it's a nice little snippet from the past, from back in 2004.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you read the email from Mark about what it is he's trying to achieve, he's not actually talking about making Ubuntu. He's talking about making Launchpad. He's talking about a place, a tool set for open source projects to manage code and issues and builds and distribution of those builds, which is interesting. And then that became, the platform to build an operating system on.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think Robert says that he was the second employee or something in that post. And as you say, there's no mention of the desktop. I mean, was the desktop even conceived? Was all of this work to support what became Ubuntu, or, did the desktop just fall out of the equation by accident?
That's an interesting point. And I wasn't around right at the very start, back in 2004 at the No Name Year. I found out about Ubuntu after it had been released. And Robert and people like George Castro and Colin Watson and James Henstridge and James Troop and all these people who were involved right back at the start will know that backstory. I think maybe the first employee might have been Kiko, who was the lead developer on Launchpad. And yes, I didn't learn until after I started working at Canonical that Ubuntu wasn't actually the first product. Launchpad was the first product. And all the build tools that were used, I think Mark envisaged Launchpad as being a replacement for SourceForge, something better than SourceForge, with Bazaar being the CVS system that you would use with Launchpad. So yeah, I don't know how it got from, well, we should make a desktop, from Launchpad. I don't know how they got from one to the other, or whether they were both formulated at the same time and it was just a succession of products that you had to build to get to the destination of having an Ubuntu desktop. But it's super interesting. And I would like at some point in the future for these minds who've been part of this process, those ones who are still around, if they can, write the history from their perspective as well. Because I think these are quite an insight into the early days. Especially if you talk to someone like Paul Sladen, who was there around about the start as well. And, if you chat to him about conversations in Mark's flat in London or in a hotel in Oxford, the same place we had Oddcamp in Oxford. And then you hear the little stories that they tell about, decisions that were made and how they came up with the name and, all that kind of stuff. It's quite fascinating for those of us who like a bit of inside baseball, discussion. To use an American term, I'm sorry. Next up, Mark.
The Debian user repository is a thing.
The what?
I think we've mentioned before about the Arch user repository, and we had a conversation about, if we wanted something like that on Ubuntu a few episodes ago, I think. Well, someone has made the Debian user repository, which is the equivalent, but for Debian, and presumably it would work on Ubuntu as well. So it's been developed by a guy called Hunter Wittenborn, who initially developed a tool for building Debian packages from the package build format used by Arch, and then that has evolved into a repository of those packages. Now, I've not tried it. I'm not sure how. I guess this doesn't give you an apt repository. I assume it works another way. I'm not really sure.
I have tried it. I tried it a few days ago, and so what I did was I installed Debian on a machine. In my case, I actually just did it in a container. And then there's a specific version of this MakeDeb tool that you need. And so I added Hunter's repository to allow me to get MakeDeb. Once you've got MakeDeb, you can then use that to get applications from the AUR. Now, it actually failed for me because I think it's quite early in development, and it failed simply because the path to user bin bash was different on my Debian system than it would be on Arch or on whatever the package scripts that are in the AUR expect. I think they expect user bin bash. And on my Debian system, it was just bin bash. And so it looked like it was all going to work, and it went off to the AUR. And I just got a simple package from the AUR, and it got a package and then failed to build it. And I gave up at that point because I was like, okay, this is not ready. This doesn't work yet. And I don't think I did anything wrong. I just followed the instructions. But I think the interesting point is he's going to switch from pointing at AUR, which is the Arch user repository, to DUR, the Debian user repository, where there will be a repository of packages that are made specifically for this MakeDeb, which mirrors the same format as the AUR, and it's got a search tool like the AUR web UI, and you can use command line tools, and it's very familiar. If you've used Pacman or any of the Yout or whatever, the various AUR tools, you can do that with this. I think that's the goal, is so that you could have a base install of Debian, and then just like you install packages that build from source on your local machine on Arch, you could get that on Debian.
Right.
Early days, but quite interesting, I thought.
Yeah.
Finally, Martin, what's next?
It's the return of the Ubuntu wallpaper competition, specifically for the impish Indri release, which is what will become Ubuntu 2110.
So we've done this a bunch of times over the years. Are they doing it differently this time? It's a reboot, you said. So what changed over the last couple of years?
In the last couple of years, there haven't been submissions from the community. There have been, you organised a World Cup of Wallpapers. I think that's what it was called.
I forgot that. Yeah, that was last year, wasn't it? Crikey, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
And the release team have been picking imagery from Unsplash that matches the animal or adjective. So it's a little bit of fun for the release team in the sort of stressful 4 days leading up to final release. But anyway, it's back for the first time since 1910, or the 1910 release, I should say.
Not the year 1910. Ubuntu's been around a while, but not that long.
We'll have links to the discourse post in the show notes, but if you want to participate, you will need to get your wallpaper submitted by the 20th of August. It needs to be 3840 by 2160 pixels. You need to be the image rights holder for whatever's being created, and you need to license it Creative Commons by SA 4.0.
Yeah, there's already been pages and pages and pages of images. If you load the thread, if you click through to Discourse, you see pages and pages and pages of images that people have already submitted in varying quality and sizes and types. Some of them are, crafted images, and some of them are just photographs. So yeah, get your images in and maybe you'll be on the desktop of the future. And that's all the community news for this week. Now some stuff from the wider tech world. First up, Martin, what's new?
NVIDIA have a new Linux driver, which, among other things, adds DLSS support for Proton.
What is DLSS?
Asking all the important questions there, yes.
DLSS is one of the more interesting things in this release. It's deep learning supersampling. And if you've got a 4K monitor, it's a way that you can actually render the game at a lower resolution, like 1080p, and then it uses deep learning, apparently, to
AIML.
then supersample that, so you can maintain your frame rates and have sort of close to 4K image fidelity.
What kind of peasant has a 4K display but not a video card to drive it?
Well, the problem is that even with today's bleeding edge graphics cards, there's still not enough to play 4K games at really high frame rates. So that's why this is advantageous, because it can get you, in many cases, above 60 frames per second, and in some cases, well beyond that if you've got high refresh rate monitors.
It's pretty stunning to me that the mathematical calculation to calculate the lighting and the color to put in a pixel on a screen is more expensive than using AI to scale it up and guess what that color should be based on the pixels around it. It's amazing that it's come that far.
Yeah. And this is more an issue when you're using the ray tracing features in modern games as well, because that really eats the GPU horsepower. So that's going to be good, because what this will mean is that through Proton and Wine, DLSS will be available in games. And at the moment, it's slim pickings. I think Doom Eternal, No Man's Sky, Wolfenstein, Youngblood currently support the existing DLSS implementation for Proton that sits on top of Vulkan. And then later in the year, they're going to be adding support for DirectX games. So I imagine that this will expand considerably. So I wonder, I mean, we talked about this Steam Pal. I wonder if any of these things are related and whether NVIDIA have a hand in, what the Steam Pal might be. We shall have to see.
So you're thinking maybe the Steam Pal is potentially a low-end NVIDIA hardware, but capable of DLSS, and maybe only able to render at 640 by 480 or something,
No
and can be
idea.
scaled up to 8K or something with this magical voodoo AI/ML stuff.
I mean, if you look at the hardware for the Switch, that's very similar. It's an NVIDIA system on chip, which it doesn't have a huge amount of graphical capability. It can just about display at 1080 when you're docked, and 720 on its internal screen. So if it's something similar to that, then this would make perfect sense.
Maybe they could render at 720p everywhere, and just rely on DLSS to scale it up.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the limitations are. Like how low can you start with and get an acceptable result?
I'm sure YouTube has the answer to those questions. I mean, this has been around for a while. Anyway, there's a couple of other features. There's one that I was really pleased to see. There's a feature called NVFBC, which is frame buffer capture, which means to capture video directly off the video card without having to use OpenGL or Vulkan or anything like that. Literally just like mem copy the stuff off. And I've been using that. And there's some improvements for that, which I'm pleased to see. If you've got high refresh monitors, there's some fixes for that. And what most people will be interested in is there's initial support for hardware accelerated OpenGL and Vulkan on X-Wayland. So we're getting to a place where things are going to start to improve on X-Wayland with NVIDIA. Although at the moment there's no accelerated video decoding and some of the utilities don't work yet. But this is, their first step.
Yeah, stepping stones in the right direction, isn't it?
Yeah.
Neat. Next up, bad news if you own a Western Digital MyBook Live.
What is a MyBook Live?
It's one of those home domestic NAS things that comes in a box, and you plug it into your network, and it's got a web admin tool, and you can share your drives on your network so that you can store all your photos and your videos and whatever on one of these devices. It's just like a home NAS appliance.
So server in a box.
Yeah, kind of thing. The downside is it is open optionally, and I think by default, to the internet so that you can access your files from away from your home securely.
What could possibly go wrong?
By default?
Well, I believe so.
Gosh.
But that's not actually the problem, because it's all very secure, It's very secure. Except for CVE vulnerability 2018-18472, which is understood to be a problem which has been used by attackers. This is the belief. Now, the reason why I'm being a bit vague is because we don't actually have the full details of what's going on. This all manifested itself when someone started a thread on the Western Digital Discourse forum saying, "Help, all my data in MyBook Live is gone and the owner password is unknown." So when they tried to log in to the web admin tool, it just didn't know anything, and there were no files in all the shared folders. And it looked like, there's some kind of disk crash or disk event. And then a lot of other people popped up and said, yeah, mine's the same. And it seems like a lot of people have been hit with this problem. And, potentially there's a widespread issue that Western Digital have acknowledged, and they've recommended everyone unplug their Western Digital live books from the internet. Which is probably a good idea.
Oh dear.
It's the most secure way to run a server, I understand.
It's a put it in a cave and block the cave up. It's sold as a secure device that you can share files with your family and friends, and you can remotely access. So you've got the data under your control, and you're not putting it in the cloud on somebody else's computer and all that nonsense. But it does seem like some people have been hit, and they're not entirely sure if it's a remote attacker who has, swept the internet looking for machines or something. We don't know a lot because Western Digital haven't said a lot other than, at the time of we record this, other than disconnect the thing from the internet, which is a bit of a shame. Now, some people have managed to get some data back. I read and saw that someone had taken the disks out of the machine and plugged them into a real computer, and then used third-party software to. There's a tool called RStudio, not to be confused with R Studio. There's this thing called RStudio, which can do data recovery. And they were able to recover data off the disks separately, like pulling each disk out at once and putting it in their home computer and then pulling all the data off. But, that's a bit of an advanced thing. So these people who are suffering with data loss probably need to contact someone who's going to be able to do that kind of data recovery for them.
Yes, it's going to be interesting if they come out with a software update to fix this vulnerability, if that's what it is, how they're going to distribute that. Because saying, everyone with one of these that's vulnerable, turn it on this date and you'll get an update. That's the perfect time for whoever's been perpetrating this to sweep the internet and attack everyone. Or they could mail everyone USB sticks.
Yes, I don't know if the Western Digital ones are the same, but I had a NAS where you could download an update onto a USB key and plug it in the back and turn it on, and it would boot off it and do the update. So it may well be that's the case.
Do it from another device.
Yeah, but the thread is long, and there are many grumpy people on there with file data loss. So I'm sure it's very frustrating, and I suspect Western Digital are keeping very quiet because there's potential for lawsuits for people who've lost their data.
It sounds expensive.
Yes. So watch that and find out how that goes. What's next, Mark?
A group of UK artists is proposing a Gadget levy to help fund the arts.
A Gadget levy?
Yes. So this would basically be a tax on everything that can store and download creative content. Where they're suggesting something between 1% and 3% on top of the purchase price. That would then go to artists by some means in order to support. I suppose the idea is that people buy devices to consume content, so shouldn't the people who create those content get some of the money that goes into buying those devices?
What, like they're not paid to create the content by Netflix and Amazon?
This sounds backwards.
So I did that did get me wondering is if we're paying for the content, presumably, they're not saying this isn't, home taping is killing music. They're not saying we're doing this because everyone is BitTorrenting stuff and we need to get paid anyway.
Well, they're not saying that because they know everyone would balk at that. And everyone would say, well, hang on a minute. I use BitTorrent for my Linux CDs. And actually, I'm consuming all my content from Disney Plus, which is a paid service, and Netflix, which is a paid service, and my Virgin Media connection, which is a paid service, and that money goes to those people and they have to license the content from the studio. If you're not getting paid for that, that's not my fault.
No, indeed. And in this country, we pay tax/VAT on said items, and that money goes into a big melting pot and funds, among other things, the Arts Council, who then dole out money to, aspiring artists and content creators and what have you to support and nurture them. So this sounds mental to me.
I mean, we are behind some other countries. Some other countries were putting levies on blank tapes, blank CDs, all that kind of stuff back in the 90s when the piracy was a problem that was killing music and killing the music industry and killing the
which is why
industry.
It's now dead.
Yeah, which is why it's now dead, and there are no movies and there is no music.
Yeah, like Napster was going to kill the music industry, but then again, Spotify came along and figured out how to monetize it, and it's massively successful.
Do you know what depresses me more about anything is that I held Olivia Colman in high regard, and now her name's on this thing, and she's knocked her down a peg or two. I'm really disappointed in this because it is ludicrous that we should have to pay a tax because some people illegally download stuff and some people torrent stuff, and it's pointing at the wrong place. It really is. This is outrageous, and I'm disgusted. From Tunbridge Wells. Write to us and let us know if the country that you hail from places a tax on media and devices that are able to store media, and is it transparent that money goes to the arts, and can you show that the money goes to the arts, or does it just go into a big pot of cash and get spent on roads and tax relief for airlines? Let us know. Show at ubuntupodcast.org. Thanks very much. That's the end of the news. And that's all for this week. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week when we're going to discuss some important subjects and read your feedback, which is lovely, and we love getting it. Thank you for sending it to us. If you want to send us some more, send it to show@ubuntupodcast.org. And if you want to chat to us in between one show and the next, you can join us in our very friendly and open Telegram channel, which is easily found at ubuntupodcast.org/telegram. And I'd like to thank Joe Ressington for producing this show very kindly with his delicate ears. Thank you all for listening. See you next time.